Hi, everybody.
Hey, hey, hey.
We're glad to be here. We're chuckling. Anyway, I'm Amelia.
I'm here.
Okay, and this is Monday with Jesus, and we are in the Gospel of Matthew up to chapter 29. So Tom will tell us the story.
9, not 29.
Nine. Yes, we're up to chapter 9. Right. Okay, here we go. Matthew 9. Take it away, Tom.
Jesus went about in all the cities and villages and teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send laborers into his harvest." So then he summoned the 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to cure every disease and every sickness. And these are the names of the 12 apostles. There was the first was Simon, who's also called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, the son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Thomas and Bartholomew, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James the son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Canaanian, and Judas Iscariot, who's the one who betrayed him. These 12, Jesus sent out with the following instructions: go nowhere among the Gentiles, and do not enter any towns of the Samaritans, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, proclaim the good news. The kingdom of God is drawn near. Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, and cast out demons. You received without pay. Give without pay.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Okay. All right.
Jesus is on the move.
He's going.
He's going around. So
he's multiplying.
Yeah, he's teaching, he's proclaiming, and he's acting. All right, let's talk about the proclamation business first, because that's at the beginning and then at the end, also in the instructions he gives his disciples. So it says he's proclaiming good news of the kingdom of heaven, and then at the end it's that he says, the kingdom of heaven is drawing near, and that it's good. In both cases, it's good news. So I really have two questions about this. One is, well, let's start with the first one. So what's good news? What would be good about what he's saying to people?
The proclamation of the good news of the kingdom is the proclamation that what has been awaited for many years, for centuries, since the hope of the kingdom of God was announced by the prophets. We've been waiting for 300-400 years. So that it's drawing near, and that the time of the dominance of the powers of evil is coming to an end, and the powers of good, the powers of the kingdom of God as a righteous and blessed system of government, but also of relationship with God, that promise is being fulfilled. And so the time for that to be established fully is drawing near, is at hand.
Okay, and then I want to talk a little bit about the word kingdom. That's a political reference or metaphor for monarchical political system, which we don't have. I mean, Great Britain still does, but
not really.
Not well.
The king
They
doesn't
have a monarch.
power.
Yeah. Anyway, a lot of people aren't too thrilled with that metaphor, and so we've heard. Well, at our church, we've had a sermon series on the kingdom. I've heard that previously as well. And you sort of, you don't like that. I'll just put it right out there. So you want to, you could tell both the reasons why they're searching for some other metaphor, what they're trying to relate by that one, why you don't like it. Is there an alternative, anything better than kingdom of God, and what's the Greek word and all of this? You want to just address that word a little bit for us, if you would.
Well, a metaphor, the word kingdom translates the Greek word basileia, and it's a reference to a system of government that was centered in a king. It was the way that all government was structured in the ancient world. There were a series of kings and emperors. Julius Caesar, for example,
Pharaoh was a kind of king. Oh, I mean, that was a same.
Yeah, right.
One person who had pretty much absolute power over everybody and everything, right?
And generally, it was someone who was a genetic descendant of a previous king. So it was a family system of succession. And that persisted until the 18th century. So the French Revolution was a revolution against the monarchy. The United States was the first major government that was established without a king. And so the freedom that was announced by the patriots was a freedom from domination and power of the king, who was the dominant source of power, though there was a parliament in England. But anyhow, that was the problem with kingdom, is that the kingdom of God was initially understood to be a co-equivalent of Israel, and of that as an ethnic place. That was it's reflected in this story. To go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And that excluded Gentiles and Samaritans and so on. So it was set up as a kingdom, that is, of people who were related by blood. The kingdom that was proclaimed was more inclusive. But that doesn't happen in Matthew until the very end, when Jesus sends the disciples to go and make disciples of all the nations, all the Gentiles. And so that's the first time that this broader concept of the kingdom as inclusive of all people is established in the Gospel of Matthew.
Okay, so I mean, should we just stick with kingdom of God, kingdom of
I
Matthew?
think that's what's best, is to understand what kingdom meant for them, and to do our own translation of what our governmental system is.
I know sometimes you use the government of God.
Yeah,
Which,
that,
it's
that's
supposed to be
a
a political
legitimate translation.
metaphor that, yeah, I think might in some ways make sense. But anyway, thought that was interesting. Okay, so then Jesus, he sees the crowds and he has compassion on them. And I love this phrase, because they were harassed and helpless.
Yeah,
That was kind of new to me, and I was looking at this story. Harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Why would they be harassed and helpless?
because they were dominated by the Romans, by Roman government. And so they were harassed by soldiers who would live in their homes, who would, take power, who would make them carry packs. So, and to pay, and most of all, they were harassed in paying taxes to build great monuments in Rome. And they were helpless. That is, they were dominated. The military power of Rome was overwhelming, and so they were without help in relation to that power.
Okay. And then Jesus uses these kind of agricultural or rural metaphors that we kind of take for granted, but most of us really don't know all that much about sheep or shepherds. But he uses a simile to describe people if they're like sheep without a shepherd. So it made me think there was a time in my life, my dad got this farm when I was senior in high school, and we had sheep. We had kind of like, we had all the farm animals, including this flock of sheep. And I remember one time I was supposed to help get them in the barn or something, and I was not the good shepherd, whatever. I was trying to get the barn. This sheep looks at me, and it went between my legs. So that's my recollection, of sheep. But so what? Why? I mean, what does happen to sheep without a shepherd?
They just wander off in all directions at once, and they get lost, and they don't know where they're going, and so they're really dumb.
Yeah, they aren't very smart animals. Well, they're sort of smart enough to know how to get around me or
right.
through me. Yeah.
So they just go off in all directions at once. They have no sense of location or direction or whatever. So without a shepherd, they're lost.
In trouble. Yeah. Okay. All right. So then another, this is an agricultural metaphor. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. I think, that's pretty straightforward. I think we could figure that out.
Right.
So then he segues into calling the disciples, and we have the naming of the disciples. And he tells them, well, first of all, there's like 3 different times Matthew says 12. He uses this number 12. First, it's the 12 disciples, then it's the 12 apostles, and then again at the end, there was the 12. What it seems like 12 is an important number. What might that refer to?
Well, there's the 12 tribes. So the 12 sons of Jacob, of Israel, are the classic 12 in the traditions of Israel.
So you did pretty well getting through that list of disciples by heart.
Yeah, well, almost.
Yeah, it's always harder in Zoom. But do you have any any comments about the list of disciples, and or any hints for people who want to try to learn that list by heart? How did you go about doing it?
Yeah, well, clearly my system was imperfect. The way that I remember it is, there's Simon, Peter, and James and John, the guys from the Sea of Galilee, and then Philip and Bartholomew. I have associated that with P and B, which is close to P&G.
Or peanut butter.
Right. Then Thomas, that's easy for me. So I have these hooks with Philip. If I can get Philip, then I can get Bartholomew. Then Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, a kind of self-reference, I think. Then James, the son of Alphaeus, a second James, is then paired with Thaddeus, and Simon the Cananaean is a distinctive thing. What Cananaean meant in the first century is ambiguous, but it's very distinctive. So Simon the Canaanite and Judas Iscariot.
Yeah.
So once I get the most difficult are getting the link from Matthew to James, the son of Alphaeus. That's the one that's hardest.
Yeah. Jesus empowers them to do these or he tells them to do these different things. I hope he empowered them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what does having authority over unclean, I'm looking at what questions. What does that mean? Having power over the unclean spirits and curing every sickness and every disease and sickness, which is exactly what he had done. But what's that about? Just
one of the signs of the coming of the kingdom of God was healing. So Jesus, distinctively among the prophets of Israel, heals lots of people. Elijah and Elisha healed a few, but Jesus is healing, every disease and every sickness. And so his giving that authority over the powers of sickness and death is then an extension of and a broadening of the concept of the kingdom of God as a political definition. So this is an extension of that to health, wholeness, to freedom from domination by unclean spirits. And unclean spirits were, on the one hand, what we would call mental illness. It was also various forms of addiction, where they were subject to powers beyond their control. The unclean spirits were also, it's reflected, associated with demons. And I've heard people who are addicted talk about, the demon alcohol. The demon is a power that is greater than a person can manage by themselves. Mm-hmm. So anybody with a demon needs help in order to be freed from that demon, from that unclean spirit that destroys them.
And Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous has been, one of their significant 12 steps is admitting you're powerless and that you need the help of a higher power to conquer this demon, or to
right.
kick out the demon, rather. So, yeah, it's an important part of the beginning of the healing process. So Matthew calls this 12 first disciples and then apostles. What's the difference, those two terms?
Well, apostles is a noun from apostello, which means to send. So they are sent on this mission by their teacher.
Okay. So disciples more about being a student.
A student, right. Somebody who learned his teachings, who learned his stories. The disciple was one who would follow So Jesus distinctively organized his school as a traveling school, where the disciples would follow after him on his journey through Galilee and various towns and villages and so on. And so now he's sending them out and extending his mission by having trained 12 disciples who now can represent him in the broader community.
Sitting out laborers into the harvest, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're not just learning these things from him for their own spiritual benefit, but also, more importantly, perhaps for the benefit of others.
Yes.
Okay. But also, it tells them where they should go and where they should not go. He begins with where they should not go. They should not go to the Gentiles and the Samaritans. Who are those two?
Right. Well, the Gentiles was everybody who wasn't a Jew, who wasn't a descendant of Jacob, of Israel. So there were two classes of people. There were the Israelites, and there were everybody who wasn't an Israelite.
Else, okay.
But that was also associated with the nations that had dominated Israel for some 600 years. The Babylonians, the Egyptians, the
Syrian,
Persians,
yeah.
the Syrians, and then the Romans.
Right.
So they were all
Gentiles.
representative of the Gentiles, of the nations.
All right. Enemy peoples. And Samaritans?
Yeah.
Samaritans.
Well, the Samaritans were cousins who were totally alienated and had merged with the people who had conquered them, the Syrians, and so they were then regarded as not being Israelites. They had defected and had merged both their religion and their families with the Syrians.
Okay. All right. Well, lastly, what are the implications of this story for ministries of peace and justice?
One of the striking things about these stories in the Gospels is how much they are focused on healing, curing every disease and every sickness. And so the implication of that is that that tradition of establishing hospitals and of caring for people directly was a significant part of the mission of for example, the Methodists in the 18th and 19th century. We've kind of lost that sense of justice. And so the implication of this is that to shape the medical system of the country to serve those who are sick and to bring about healing as a kind of right that is available to all people. So that's one of the ministries of peace and justice that often does not get addressed in the churches as a central part of their mission. So that's what I would name today as a distinctive emphasis. And the implication of that is that the church needs to be fully involved in advocating for universal health care. That's what Jesus announced and modeled, was domination, freedom from curing every sickness and every disease.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for joining us as we look at this wonderful story from the Gospel of Matthew. Have a good week.
Good week. Blessings.